Hello, and welcome along to segment 4 of Your Brilliant Brain and the Wild World of Work. And today, for the first time, we are going to begin to enter the working world with our human, our chimp, and our computer. So I hope you're enjoying the program so far. And of course, what you'll notice is over the last 3 weeks, we have taken our time to introduce our key brain characters so that we have enough of an understanding about who they are and how they typically approach things to begin to start to use that knowledge and that awareness, specifically thinking about our working worlds. So let's open our computers or open the door and take a step into a typical day at work. Just begin to start to think about what that means from our key brain players' perspective. So first up, of course, viewing it from the point of view of CEO us. The human part of the brain, that humanity center, the prefrontal cortex, the us we are intending to be. And what we often notice, especially if the overall environment and the relationship with the work is still in a good place, is that human us is likely to switch on that computer every morning or walk into the office every morning, keen to contribute, keen to do our good job, keen to be part of something meaningful, something purposeful, and also key to develop their skills and develop their capabilities and capacities in the particular role. So usually, if the relationship is pretty good, CEO us enters every day wanting to do their best. That's not necessarily where we're going to end the day, but certainly for the vast majority of people, they will arrive at work in the morning wanting to do their best. So CEO us, full of enthusiasm, wanting to really get involved. Then, of course, we have our other brain center, that wonderful, powerful chimp. Now, sometimes the chimp is going to be completely aligned with the human part of the brain. It's also perhaps looking forward to what it's got on for the day because it's going to be rewarding, not only from a human point of view, but from a chimp point of view. There's going to be enjoyment, there's going to be connectivity, there's going to be stuff the chimp is good at and can feel good about itself. It is completely aligned, and therefore we're likely to feel the benefit of that alignment, enthusiasm, energy, and the ability to move forward nice and easily. Sometimes, of course, though, it's possible that the chimp might have a differing viewpoint on the to-do list for today. Maybe the human recognizes that this is important, meaningful stuff that needs to get done, but the chimp is of the opinion that perhaps it's a little bit dry, maybe a little bit boring, maybe it's not in the mood, maybe it's just not what it likes doing and it really doesn't want to. And here we might notice some of the challenges of having a chimp not so much on board, more acting as a little bit of a drag. We might find it delaying, using some of its favorite tactics like procrastination, distraction, these kinds of things, to basically not have to do what it doesn't want to do. We might also notice our human feeling like it has to put in a lot more effort to make those things happen, and that therefore it feels a lot more tired a lot earlier in the day. Regardless of whether the chimp is entering the working day feeling enthusiastic or slightly less than enthusiastic, it is, of course, also keeping an eye on potential threat in every moment of every day, every interaction, every email, every person it speaks to, and so on and so on. So, of course, it's also always paying attention for those potential threats that might come along. And then, of course, every single one of us is also bringing with us that fantastic database that's allowing us to streamline. It's throwing out all those useful habit loops that do quite a lot of our day-to-day without us even having to think about it. Things like switching on computers, getting into certain programs, setting certain things up, doing certain pieces of work that perhaps don't require too much thought, but we can do very, very easily on autopilot. It's got all of that brilliant stuff there for us, streamlining and saving us energy. But of course, we also know that it's interpreting the environment around it too. It's taking meaning from what it's experiencing, and then it's feeding that information to both the human and the chimp as it goes through the day as well, should they require some advice about what they should be doing. So it's a very important character here. So those are our three main brain characters, but here we also need to introduce the fourth character. Sorry, it's hiding behind my head on the recording. I forgot to move that to the other side, but that says the work. The work we are actually at work to do is our fourth character. Why? Because we have a relationship with it. Each and every one of us has a relationship with the work, with the working stuff that we are supposed to do on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes that relationship is going to be good. We have a good or maybe even excellent relationship with our work. We now know that that's likely to mean that we will have much more freedom. It will be a lot easier to use the higher brain centers, the prefrontal cortex, the human part of the brain. Will find it a lot easier to be in control, to be involved, to make things happen when we have a really good relationship with our work. Of course, sometimes we will know that we perhaps don't have such a good relationship with our work. Sometimes that might be wholesale. And sometimes it might be with certain elements of it or certain people that are going to be part of it. Here we might notice where that relationship isn't quite so good. It's a different brain player who is primarily in control in these spaces. And of course, we now know that to be the chimp. And supporting and interpreting what our work means, well, that's going to be the world of our computer. And it definitely has a role to play here in terms of those relational dynamics. So if you think to what we know about humans and computers and chimps specifically, and when we wrap in our relationship with work, we can begin to see that actually this could be quite a complex set of dynamics. After all, we could enter the working day in a really good headspace, but if our chimp were to detect a threat, that might be very easily rattled. And if the overall relationship we have with our role or with our employer or the work itself isn't in a great place at this point in time, then that makes it even more complex. And of course, if you'll remember back to the session that we did specifically on the chimp, you will remember how it views the world around it as a jungle out there. And a lot of those interpersonal threats, those emotional threats, are heightened and even more likely to occur when we start thinking about an environment as complex as the world of work. So the basic bottom line here is that it's to our enormous advantage to recognize that actually our working worlds aren't necessarily going to be clean and straightforward. The dynamics within our working worlds aren't necessarily always going to be easy to navigate, and that therefore that means, from a brain perspective, having an awareness of the dynamics and how sometimes those dynamics can be less than favorable, meaning that we're using a less than optimal part of the brain to try and navigate that complexity, is enormously useful to us. It's not necessarily going to change anything in and of itself, but it is at least going to allow us to recognize why perhaps some of the things around us happen, and actually that an intentional approach, an approach that recognizes and acknowledges some of the complexity, might be to our advantage. Because to try and pretend that isn't the case simply flies in the face of the reality, especially when we are using the reality that is afforded to us, the knowledge that is afforded to us from the world of the neuroscientific community specifically. Because the science there is really quite simple. If it's a jungle out there from a chimp's point of view, and a lot of the threat is going to be from a social perspective, an emotional perspective, then it is in fact highly likely that there are going to be frequent points during our day where actually our working world is quite tricky to navigate, because we are perhaps having a limbic reaction. learning how to operate as best we can in this environment feels like a really great way forward. Forewarned is forearmed. Knowledge is power. And I think in this particular instance, knowledge is freedom. It gives us the wiggle room to choose if we understand where perhaps we might need to deploy that. So, what exactly is it that we should be talking about? What should we be thinking about? What should we be looking at from this point of view? Whether you're approaching this from an individual contributor perspective, i.e. you're just thinking for yourself, or indeed you are a manager or a leader and you're thinking about this from a wider perspective. What should we really be focusing on to make a difference here, if that's actually the case? And this is the million-dollar question, and I'm fairly certain millions of dollars have been spent on trying to find the answer from some big players, including Google, who ran a several-year project called Project Aristotle, looking to try and understand what was the magic ingredient for a high-performing team. They weren't necessarily answering this question, but because they were trying to look at what would help people perform at their best, they accidentally were. They were asking that question because, of course, we know if we want a brain to be operating at its best, it needs to be an environment that allows the prefrontal cortex, CEO us and our human, to be in control more of the time. So we were, in fact, exploring and looking for exactly the same answer. It's a very long story. I'm not going to bore you with it, but I am going to share with you the outcome, the thing that they discovered was most important. And it's maybe a term that you've heard quite a lot about, psychological safety. That actually teams perform best, individuals perform best when they are psychologically safe. Now we can all quietly smile and say, yeah, we know this. We know why. It's because when they feel psychologically safe, the human is in control. That allows them to do all the amazing stuff that human part of the brain can do. That's why they perform better when they're psychologically safe. So we can already understand why that would be true. But making it happen, well, that's an entirely different matter. Knowing about it, understanding why it matters is one thing. Making it a reality is quite another. And here is where, certainly in my experience, I feel we still have a long way to go. We'll hear all about psychological safety in management and leadership circles. It's a phrase bandied around so often that I do worry it becomes meaningless, because I'm not entirely sure that everyone really understands what it would mean. Because what it would mean would be that we were placing our focus and our energy on ensuring that as much of the time as possible and for as many people as possible, an environment feels psychologically safe. People feel able to share their thoughts, their questions, their concerns, and anything else that's meaningful to them as they contribute, without fear of being judged, without fear of reprisals, without fear of it accidentally being triggering for somebody else because it maybe steps on their toes or they think it's a threat. Now, for me, that means we all need to learn to be with one another in a far more sophisticated way than is not necessarily natural for us. But psychological safety is certainly the goal that we are aiming for. And for the rest of this session, I'd like to try and tease apart what that would mean we would need to be focusing on. So come with me and we'll explore. So how do we take a huge concept like psychological safety and make it a little easier for us to get our heads around, but crucially, a little easier for us to understand where we would be best advised to be putting our attention and efforts in order to make a difference? And here I'm delighted to introduce you to the concept of the SCARF model by David Rock. So this one is an absolute gem. It was in fact designed to be used in the working world, but I find it incredibly useful in all walks of life with anyone, anywhere. So I hope that you do too. Now, I'm going to say an awful lot more about it in some extra follow-up clips that you'll find in the resource pack. So for now, what I just want to do is introduce the broad concept to you. If you'd like to dig into it a little bit more, then we'll do that with the extra resources. So as you can see, there's 5 areas up there. And that's the real impact of this model, I think, is that it gives us a sense of which 5 places should we be most interested in trying to make things feel as secure as possible. And that is exactly what the research is actually giving us some guidance with. It's helping us understand, if you like, the 5 most likely things that people will be using to decide whether or not an environment around them is psychologically safe or not. And therefore, from our point of view, it's extremely helpful to be aware of what they are. So let me just very rapidly run you through them, just so you've got a sense of what they are and how that might be impactful. So at the top there, and the most important, certainly in my experience of working folks, is a sense of security in where we fit in to the social groupings that we are part of. So where we belong, what our roles are, how that we are valued, appreciated, all of that great stuff. That's all wrapped up in status. Now, obviously, different people display status in differing ways, but this is what the essence of it is. It's a sense of security that I, as an individual, am secure in my understanding of how I fit in and belong to all of the various different social groups I'm part of. And yes, that does include team, that does include things like departments, it does include organizations, and it also includes relationships, particularly the ones that we have perhaps with our immediate boss, our immediate manager. That's all secure, that we know we're valued, we know we're appreciated, we know they want us there, that sort of stuff. So when that feels secure, that is what someone is likely to be using as a really big indicator that the environment around them is secure, that they are psychologically safe. When there's any potential threat to that, that is what is likely to make them feel less psychologically safe. And this could either be intentional or completely unintentional. It could be real or perceived. Remember, threat doesn't have to be an actual thing. It could be, I think there's a threat, and therefore I will perceive things as such. So status is actually extremely easily disrupted, especially at work, especially when we consider things like our performance and reports that we will get on that, feedback that we will get, the relationships we have with other people who are also doing similar jobs, and so on and so on. Our sense of security in our status is not as solid as we would often like it to be. And here we can be very easily threatened, sometimes by the slightest thing, sometimes by non-verbals, not even what people have said, but actually maybe what they didn't say. Next up is certainty, and as we've already discussed, the human brain has an enormous fondness for knowing what comes next, because after all, that's what allows it to do all its streamlining, autopiloting, and all that other great stuff. Bottom line, it doesn't particularly appreciate change, especially change it didn't choose. And without extreme care, change is usually going to generate a sense of threat until new security, new certainty can be created as the process of change gets underway, or as the thing that has become uncertain is worked through. So certainty. Autonomy is about the fact that people typically like to feel that they get to make their own choices and that they have the freedom to decide what order they're going to do stuff in or how they're going to do it, that kind of thing. The levels of autonomy, person to person, will vary hugely, with some folks liking lots and other people preferring not that much. But the key here is in understanding that if autonomy is perceived to be taken away or is taken away, that is likely to be met as a threat. That is not likely to be received particularly well. Also, because it's going to potentially impact on the person's sense of status as well. You're taking my choice away. What does that say about how I fit in here? Would be a very typical way of processing that information. Of course, it might also impact on their sense of certainty as well. So here you can begin to see how the individual scarf elements are sometimes impacted on their own, but they're sometimes impacted together, and they are all interlinked. Relatedness is about connectivity to the other people in groupings around us. So yes, that's going to include our families, that's going to include our friends, but it's also going to include things like our teams. And any sort of cross-departmental groupings that we are part of. And again, the broad idea here is that once we have made these connections with other people, we would prefer those connections to stay nice and secure. We would prefer they didn't change too much, because now these people are important to us. Even if they're just familiar, they're still important to us. So here, changes in team membership, people leaving, people joining, that kind of thing, can have an impact on that sense of relatedness that can either be rewarding and positive, or more often than not, unfortunately, potentially full of threat if it's not handled well. So relatedness. And last but not least is a sense of fairness. And it seems that people have a very keen interest in how fairly or otherwise they or others around them are being treated. And nothing is going to grab a quicker sense of threat than a general perception that unfairness is going on. That is particularly threatening. Human beings do not respond well to that. Whereas on the flip side of that, even if a situation is not optimal, even if something is happening that is not desirable, if at least the person can hang on to the fact that they are being treated fairly, that will minimize the perception of how threatening and how unpleasant that situation is. And therefore, it's going to give them a better opportunity to make their peace with it, come to terms with it, and move forward from it quicker than were the sense of unfairness to pervade all of the other areas of the scarf too. So there you are, hopefully a nice little tool that just begins to bring into focus where it is that we would benefit from spending time, energy, and focus if we're thinking about this concept of psychological safety, specifically for others. But of course, it's relevant for us too, and it can help us understand where perhaps we might be seeing threat, where we might be experiencing threat, so that maybe we can do something about it. But for now, I'd also like to see if we can move to exploring something even simpler, something that you can take away from today and maybe have as your own little mantra, just as it is mine. And so this little statement, if you like, I have tucked in my pocket all the time. And any time I am in an environment where I feel perhaps things are not quite going well, this little thought will pop into my head to remind me that I would be very well advised to try my very best to meet the need of the other human being. And that doesn't mean I necessarily always have to fix it or stop doing what I'm doing. It means meet their very human need to be valued, to be heard, to be understood, to feel like they are a valuable, respected person in whatever scenario it is that I find myself in, whatever conversation I am trying to have. That's what I mean about meeting need, the fundamental human need to feel valued and respected. And coupled with being heard and understood, it's very, very powerful. And that at the same time, I might be looking to reduce the perceived threat as best I possibly can. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is, in fact, to meet a person's need. To say that, hey, no matter what we're talking about here, no matter what the environment is here, no matter what is happening here, you are valuable. And my intention is to look to support you, to hear you as a human being in your experience, so that we can move forward together, or so that you can decide what you'd like to do. It's a hugely powerful little formula, and it kind of reinforces itself. If we're reducing threat, we are probably trying to meet people's needs and so on. But I wanted to share the concept with you at this point. Now, before we wrap up for this section, I didn't want to leave you feeling that everything that is going to be potentially rewarding or threatening is necessarily an external experience. Sometimes we can be generating our own sense of threat and reward internally. And in my experience, there is nothing that generates a more vigorous sense of threat than what Steve Peters likes to call his gremlin twins. And the gremlin twins are unhelpful and unrealistic expectations. In other words, what is happening around us is not aligned with what we expected to be happening around us, which we will typically interpret as meaning that is not okay, which we will typically interpret as meaning that is a threat to me having what I want, having what I need, having it go the way that I was planning and hoping for, i.e., it's a threat. So sometimes the sense of threat is in fact generated internally to a person, internally to ourselves. And we will be coming back to these two guys as we go through the rest of the program, because they are fascinating. I'm also going to put some more content about this into the resource pack, but just wanting to pop it on your radar at this moment in time that sometimes it's our computer or someone else's computer that's going to be generating a sense of threat, because either they had some very unhelpful expectations about what should be happening right now, or some completely unrealistic expectations about what should be happening right now. Either way, what they wanted to happen is not happening, and they're now reacting accordingly. Of course, here, if we're doing things like listening to understand, if we are suspending judgment, if we're trying to really get alongside another person to understand what is going on from their point of view, we are going to be taking steps to reducing that threat and re-engaging the part of the brain that's got the human attached to it. But without that knowledge, we too might run the risk of considering their behavior to be unreasonable and running into expectations around behaviors of our own that cause us to also experience a threat. And here's where things can get really, really complex. More about that next time. So, where to get started if you want to begin to explore some of what this all means for you? Well, I've got some ideas up for you on the screen right now as to how you might begin to go about exploring your own workday experience. Now, whatever it is that you're going to do, I would always encourage you at this point in time to do no more than just notice, observe at this moment with curiosity. So when we do anything with curiosity, the wonderful thing about curiosity is that it suspends judgment. It holds a space where we can be, if you like, in exploration mode. We can simply be curious. We can notice what we notice without it necessarily needing to mean anything at all. It's that kind of energy that is going to serve you best, if you like, as you begin to start to think about what this means for you. It's very tempting, it's very easy to accidentally go into sort of deciding what's right and wrong mode. You might even find yourself going into sort of blame mode. Understandable, but I would just say not helpful. So if you notice that beginning to happening for you and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not handling that well at all. That's terrible. Instead of doing that, simply notice, okay, I've become aware of. I have just noticed something. I didn't notice it before. I do now. Let's hold that space with kindness and curiosity. So some useful things to perhaps begin to start to notice are spaces, places, and people with whom you feel safe. Noticing where you feel your best in your working world, where it does feel secure, where you do feel human first, if you like. Noticing perhaps if you have any chimp hangouts. Are there any particular tasks? Are there particular people? Are there particular meetings where it's more likely that you'll experience that limbic response, where perhaps the chimp is a little bit more active, or where the chimp is just downright in control? So what is it? Where is it? What's happening? And then if you would like, where can you begin to notice your gremlin twins? Now, I am in the resource pack going to talk a little bit more about this and how you might go about beginning to notice when the gremlin twins are likely on the loose, with a couple of different exercises that may be useful to you if you're thinking that feels like it would be a really, really cool place for you to explore. Right, what have we got coming up next time around? Well, we're going to be taking everything that we talked about today and beginning to start to work that into a more specific scenario. So we're going to be talking more specifically about teams. We're going to be asking the big question, why do silos happen, and why do they seem to happen so often, despite many, many organizations trying really hard to stop the formation of silos? Why do they just seem to occur anyway? And what are some of the challenges with collaborative working? Just because of the way that so many organizations are structured and organized these days, collaborative working is on the up. But does anyone really understand some of the complexities of what that means? And if we did, what advantage would that give us? What special knowledge would we have that would be useful to us and to our teams to help it make it go better more of the time? So we're going to be exploring all of that next time around. I really do hope you can join us either for the live session or indeed for the recording once it becomes available. So between then and now, your resource pack is there to help bottom this out for you, to help you take this to another level if that's what you'd like. As I mentioned, I'm going to have some stuff in there about how you can use the SCARF model for yourself, stuff in there about how you can use it if you are in fact a people lead or indeed a project lead or anything of that nature, or maybe you're even a very senior lead. The SCARF model is going to be incredibly useful to you, so some thoughts on how you might be able to use it. And then, as I said, some stuff on helping you introduce yourself to your very own gremlin twins, unhelpful and unrealistic expectation. But for now, that's all from me. I really do hope that you've enjoyed the session and the content, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.